This video was sponsored by Campfire Blaze. The ramifications of this will be felt for generations to come. Revenge is a funny old thing. It's such a simple character motivation. At its heart, it's just anger in its purest form. Character A experiences something very bad and is thus filled with rage, and decides to direct that rage out at character B, who they hold responsible. It's theoretically okay because character B deserves to experience something bad because they did something bad to character A. Character A's garden variety anger at experiencing something painful magically transforms into righteous fury once it's being directed at somebody who deserves it. But the thing about anger is it doesn't actually handle being directed very well. Sure, theoretically character A will be able to target all their righteous fury at the villainous character B, but sometimes in the process it turns out that character B actually isn't responsible. Well, then what's character A supposed to do? The reasonable thing might be to let go of the anger and move on, but if character A has been letting that anger drive them, that's not such an easy thing to do. But character A's anger can no longer be righteously directed at character B. It's not righteous fury if the target of that fury doesn't actually deserve it. If character A unleashes their vengeance on the undeserving character B, well, that's not vengeance anymore. That's just hurting someone innocent, which is an unequivocally bad thing to do. Even more unfairly, sometimes character B does deserve that vengeance, but character B isn't available for some reason. Like maybe character B is already dead, for instance. Or character B is available, but unleashing the vengeance on them will definitely hurt the unrelated and entirely innocent character C. What's character A supposed to do with all that anger now that there's nowhere righteous to put it? Fundamentally, vengeance is an ultimately selfish act, an attempt to soothe an injured soul by hurting the injurer right back. Vengeance has a twist of justice to it, framing that crusade as a matter of fairness or balance, bringing justice to an unjust universe. But while we can equivocate on the meaning of justice or fairness or deserving, none of that actually matters here, because vengeance is motivated by anger, and anger is an amoral emotion. It doesn't actually matter to the anger if the person it's taken out on deserves it. Anger just demands an outlet. It's up to the person to choose a target for that outlet, and if you want to retain some semblance of morality, that means you have to find a target who you could argue deserves to be hurt. Vengeance frames itself as justice, but will be satisfied with the illusion of justice, an eye for an eye no matter who that eye is from. If the actual wrongdoer isn't available, the avenger will often shift their focus to the next best thing. This is how we get the sins of the father situation, where someone is held responsible for actions they didn't do simply because they're connected to the person who did it. The archetypical sins of the father scenario is a child being held responsible for their parents' crimes, but it can be stretched to cover anyone being punished for someone else's actions, from family or loved ones being targeted for their personal connection, to distant descendants being assigned some kind of bloodline curse, to any revenge by proxy that depends on the suffering of someone who has personally not committed their crime they're being punished for. Now, the term sins of the father broadly originates in the Tanakh, where it appears in two specifically conflicting contexts. In Exodus, the sins of the father concept is brought up by God, saying he's a big fan of punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me. But then in Ezekiel, which was written sometime later, God says the whole sins of the father thing has been deprecated and is no longer part of his policy for the 1.1 alpha release, and now he judges everyone based on their own merits rather than holding a generational grudge, saying, "Therefore I will judge you, O house of Israel, everyone according to his ways." So when it comes to the question, should the child be held responsible for the sins of the father, there is technically biblical precedent for both answers, but no is definitely the more justifiable one, since it came later and was written as a direct response to the original yes angle, and it's also the one that is broadly more fair. Now, beyond its origins, the sins of the father trope has obviously developed pretty far and plays a role in most revenge stories, because like we've discussed, revenge is motivated by anger, and anger is pretty notorious for causing collateral damage. If character B wrongs character A and character A embarks on a quest for vengeance, character B is not going to be the only character who pays for it. Even if character A stays entirely focused on character B, the people in character B's life are going to feel the effects. Friends, loved ones, family. One way or another, the people who care about character B will feel the impact of the revenge plot, even if the only person character A directly targets is character B. Those characters are thus being indirectly punished for sins they're not responsible for. But there are a lot of ways to handle revenge, and many of them are heavier on the collateral damage than the more precision-targeted version. For instance, sometimes the collateral is actually the point. Character A might seek revenge on character B by actively targeting their loved ones to systematically strip away the things character B cares about. This is much more common with villainous revenge plots, and let's actually explore that, because revenge has a very interesting relationship with morality and heroism. I've mentioned that revenge is usually built on a white-hot core of amoral anger surrounded by a thin candy coating of plausible morality, that it's okay to make people suffer because you're in pain and angry as long as they're bad people who deserve it. Now, while revenge is almost never seen as unconditionally heroic, certain kinds of revenge plots are seen as more heroic. This usually corresponds with minimal collateral damage and targeting the actual individual wrongdoer largely exclusively. If the villain hurts the hero and the hero hurts them right back, that's usually just grouped into the general space of hero versus villain. In fact, while heroes usually oppose villains on an ideological basis most of the time, adding that revenge motivation by making the villain personally hurt the hero sometimes serves to make the hero seem more appealing to the audience, to make their investment in the plot more personal. Which is weird because fundamentally, as we've discussed, revenge is not a moral act. It's not a heroic thing to do. It's a sublimation of anger and frustration at an acceptable target. Theoretically, the target is the person who caused that anger, but in practice, that's not really how it works. There's a difference between taking revenge and the unconditionally heroic act of stopping somebody who's hurt people from hurting more people. Since the sublimation of the anger is the actual driving point of a revenge plot, it usually doesn't end up mattering who the target really is. Heroes can have vengeance arcs, but vengeance is not a heroic motivation. It's a selfish one, and the Sins of the Father angle highlights that. On paper, and from a logical standpoint, if the person who hurt Character A is not available for vengeance, Character A should stop seeking vengeance. That's the rational thing to do. Since getting justice is no longer an option, they should focus on healing instead. This is the morally good, unequivocally heroic option. But the vengeance motivation usually doesn't just go away, especially if Character A has been relying on it to keep them going and give them a purpose in life. So Character A might choose a new target, in the process revealing the truth of their motivation. Vengeance doesn't demand justice, only personal satisfaction. Character A is now actively seeking a target for their anger rather than pursuing justice against the individual who personally harmed them. This is not heroic, but that doesn't mean heroes don't have this kind of arc. For instance, almost every dark vigilante superhero has some variant of this motivation, where instead of taking out their anger on the specific person who hurt them, they choose other targets who they think deserve to be punished or need to be stopped, and take out their anger on them en masse. The motivation is still self-centered and self-destructive, but the outcome is stopping bad guys, so it theoretically works as a heroic motivation. The audience is inclined to agree that stopping bad guys is a good thing to do, so it works as a candy coating on the directionless rage centered to their motivation. But things get much more dubious if the avenging character isn't just targeting people who the audience agrees needs to be stopped or deserves to be punished. The character isn't pursuing justice for selfish reasons, they're pursuing personal satisfaction for selfish reasons, which is a selfishness double whammy. The Sins of the Father vengeance variant is where this starts getting really obvious. To see, Character B is the one who wronged Character A, but Character B isn't available to pay for their crimes. Instead, we have Character C, whose only crime is being affiliated with Character B. And no matter how bad Character B is, associating with them is not equivalent to doing whatever it is Character B did, and thus is automatically not deserving of Character A's retribution. Heroic characters are less likely to take revenge by proxy, but less morally stalwart characters might take what they can get, leading to Character C suffering for a crime they didn't commit and had no part in. It's not unheard of for protagonists to seek vengeance by proxy, but it's much more common with villains. And it's even more common for these villains to be targeting heroes for their revenge by proxy, since that's an easy way to drive large portions of the plot. Now, there's a few specific subvariants of the Sins of the Father trope. The plain vanilla option is that the avenging character wants vengeance, but the original avengee isn't available, frequently because they're already dead, so the avenger seeks out the person closest to them to work out their frustrations on, often a direct descendant. This can be something of a double whammy for the descendant in question, since if their parent/ancestor is unavailable/dead, they might already have some complexes about that, which are only going to be exacerbated by some supervillain popping out of the woodwork to attack them for stuff their absentee ancestor did. This is pretty common in cases where the avenging character just wants some kind of symbolic payback and doesn't really care who pays for it. There's also a fairly passive form of the Sins of the Father thing, where instead of somebody actively setting out to make a character suffer for the crimes of their predecessor, they're just held passively responsible for other pre-existing bad stuff. The Sins of the Father might be used as a justification or a karmic explanation for why bad things happen to this character, or are allowed to happen without any help. Sure, if bad things happen to someone randomly, that's bad, and you might want to help them, but if the character's existence is in some way cursed, that handily explains every bad thing they go through, and conveniently absolves any bystanders from feeling obligated to help them out. Sorry, buddy, will of the universe. Shouldn't have been born like that. This variant is, on paper, more inoffensive than active vengeance, but it's elevated somewhat in the heinousness department by having the distinction of being a disturbingly popular attitude in the real world. By definition, nobody deserves the circumstances they're born into. You can't deserve anything if you haven't done anything yet. But it's a very popular cop-out to ignore or dismiss someone's systemic suffering as a matter of karma or predestination or the will of the universe rather than shit luck, active malice, and zero support. For a super fun real-world example, the Book of Genesis briefly mentions something called the Curse of Ham, a curse Noah invokes after his son Ham does something gross. In response, Noah curses Ham's son Canaan to be a servant to his brethren. This curse is vague and not described in further detail, but someone decided the exact nature of the curse was that Canaan's skin got darker, and furthermore that the Curse of Ham was a really convenient way to morally justify slavery. No guys, it's not morally abhorrent for a good Christian to own a living, breathing human being with a soul, it's just a bloodline curse. Sure, you didn't do anything to deserve this, but because one guy did, thousands of years ago, you get a lifetime of agony and humiliation, and I am totally morally cool. So in short, this approach gets used to passively justify a lot of really fun atrocities because it's a lot easier to feel good about yourself as a person if you can blame a bunch of dead guys for everyone you go out of your way to hurt. Anyway, a slightly less gross and more complicated variant happens happens when the target in question is in some way actively benefiting from their ancestor's crime. This version muddies the question of how much they deserve to be targeted. Sure, they didn't do the actual bad thing, but they are actively reaping the rewards. Maybe their predecessors stole the money that made their family rich, or usurped the throne they sit on, and the avenging antagonist wants justice for what was taken for them. The target didn't actually do anything wrong, but that doesn't mean they aren't in some way responsible for their own life and circumstances, and if those circumstances are built on a crime, you could argue that they do bear some responsibility to try and mend the damage of that crime. Of course, frequently, the avenging character makes things morally simpler by going far beyond justice or fixing the damage done by the original crime and aiming for burn everything to the ground instead, which is much easier for a hero to categorically oppose than a complex question about personal responsibility. Still, this is one of the more nuanced variants, and the target frequently does agree that they have some responsibility to try and make things right, so that at minimum this kind of crime doesn't happen again on their watch. It's not their responsibility to suffer for the satisfaction of the Avenger, but it is their responsibility to try and make things right. This is also one of those things that has some pretty heavy real-world questions about it. On the refreshingly fictional side of things, there's a very simple variant of this trope where the bad guy is immortal, or at least very old, and has a grudge against some long-dead character who just happens to look almost exactly like one of the heroes, and it doesn't particularly matter to them, the actual person who wronged them is long gone. They'll just take out their aggression on this conveniently identical stranger. This version is entirely unjustified and pretty much 100% bad guys only. It's also easily solved with a mustache and a new pair of glasses. But back into the nuance zone, there's the feuding families variant, where the sins of the father don't just fall on one person. For whatever reason, two groups have been fighting for generations, and everyone is held responsible for the actions of their group, no matter how young and or innocent they are. The grudge runs deeper than any actual personal responsibility, and the only reason these guys need to fight is that the other guy is from the other group. Pretty much the archetypical example of this uniquely stupid variant is Romeo and Juliet, where the original grudge is literally never explained, because it doesn't need to be explained. This variant probably most clearly illustrates how utterly irrational and self-centered this vengeance trope is. The characters don't even have a reason to hate each other. What they have is an excuse. The Capulets and Montagues both have an acceptable target they can take out any and all of their aggression on whenever they want, and the only reason they need is our families hate each other. For all we know, some 9th century Capulets painted the Montague villa polka dots, and there's been blood in the streets of Verona ever since. Hell, if you want to extend this trope a little bit into the real world, shocking, I know, let's not make a habit of it, this is basically the justification behind any kind of demographic feud or prejudice. It's never about what the individual targeted person did. It's always about what their group can be held responsible for. It's not a reason to hate or hurt them, it's an excuse to justify hating and hurting them, which in turn is being done for personal self-centered reasons. Because if you're full of anger and hate, it feels really good to take it out on someone, and even better if you can convince yourself they deserve it. This is also pretty much the only real-world justification for war, by the way. It's never about what the soldiers or the civilian casualties did to deserve it. Vengeance isn't profound or moral or justified or anything particularly deep. It's just an inefficient and damaging way to sublimate pain and harmful emotions while seeking some kind of emotional release or catharsis. At its best, it motivates the pursuit of fairness or balance, asking for retribution for an injustice or a wrongdoing, but at its worst, it morphs into victim-seeking, looking for acceptable or justifiable targets to hurt. Vengeance produces the illusion of righteousness because it's an understandable and relatable motivation, but just because someone's been hurt doesn't mean the pain they cause in turn is justified. The sins of the father trope is one of the easiest ways to trigger a cycle of vengeance narrative, where a cavalcade of aggrieved people cause enormous amounts of damage that doesn't end until someone goes out of their way to break the cycle, frequently at great personal cost. See, if character B hurts character A and character A takes revenge on them, they can easily hurt character C in the process, even totally incidentally. Maybe character C is just hurt because they care about character B, like for instance if character B is their parent. Character A is very careful to only target character B, but character C loves character B, and there's no way character A can hurt character B without also hurting the totally innocent character C. So now character C is aggrieved and wants vengeance, and it's even justifiable. Character A friggin' murdered their parent. That motivation is so justifiable, it's literally a stock hero motivation. And when they target character A, maybe they end up hurting characters D and E in the process, who develop vengeance-y motivations of their own, and so on and so forth. Every innocent person incidentally hurt for the sins of the father ends up developing a perfectly justifiable vengeance motivation of their own. This is the exact plot of 6 whole Greek tragedies. Even the most carefully formulated vengeance plan will have collateral damage. The cycle doesn't stop until someone recognizes that just because they're in pain doesn't mean they have a right to hurt people, and stops it. Vengeance can always be justified, but a justification is the same thing as an excuse. At some point, someone needs to pump the brakes and ask what good any of this will actually do. But with all that said, the sins of the father concept is not actually always used in vengeance tropes. Sometimes characters feel responsible for the sins of their ancestors all on their own, no antagonists required. This comes in 3 major flavors. 1, a character tries to make up for the damage their ancestor caused, usually by trying to fix stuff they messed up out of a sense of personal responsibility. 2, a character constantly deals with annoying problems caused by one of their ancestors, which has some significant overlap with the my ancestor is actually the villain trope. And 3, a character's ancestor did something really bad and the character worries they might be doomed to follow in their footsteps. This is the less spicy, cursed bloodline variant. Maybe the ancestor was some legendary hero or other super cool dude who failed at a critical moment, and the hero faces the double whammy of living up to the high bar their extremely cool ancestor set and not messing up the same way their much cooler ancestor did. These uses are comparatively rarer than the vengeance-specific version, since vengeance is a very popular trope overall, but it is important to recognize that sins of the father doesn't always mean someone else is holding the character responsible. Fundamentally, the sins of the father trope is a question, and that question is, who do you hold responsible? In its non-vengeance-y variant, the character holds themselves responsible for fixing or making up for the damage their ancestor did, but in the vengeance-y variant, things very easily escalate out of control. Since if the question is reframed as, who do I hold responsible for my suffering, the anger that suffering caused can volunteer the answer, anyone and everyone you can reach. While there's an argument to be made for someone taking responsibility for the actions of their ancestors to try and mitigate or fix the damage, there's no logical reason to hurt the child for the sins of the father. There's just an emotional reason. By definition, the child did nothing wrong and thus deserves nothing bad. Their only crime was proximity to the real problem, and they didn't exactly have a choice in the matter. Because of this, heroic characters usually shy away from their vengeance the minute collateral damage enters the equation, but villainy-inclined characters have more of a tendency to double down and turn their targeted vengeance into a more large-scale crusade. After all, if you squint, maybe the person who hurt you wasn't solely responsible. Maybe the society that enabled them was. Maybe the family that supported them was. Maybe their friends and loved ones are the real villains for not stopping them. If the character is just looking for a target, they can always find one, and they can always justify it, even feel heroic about it. The cycle only breaks when the character starts asking, how can this be fixed, instead of what will make me feel good, or more commonly, when they die. Vengeance crusades have a pretty high mortality rate, especially once the avenging character crosses the burn everything to the ground threshold, which is frequently a pretty easy next step to take after target innocent people for the bad stuff someone else did. Man, that one got spicier than I expected. So, yeah, and thanks again to Campfire Blaze for sponsoring this video. As you may know, Campfire Blaze is a browser-based writing tool designed to help creators stay organized while you write and world build. It's got real-time collaboration tools if that's your jam, or you can keep it totally private. Campfire Blaze's manuscript module gives you an in-browser word processor you can use to write without losing track of your world building notes, and it automatically saves your project in the cloud. Plus, it's got an auto-tagging feature that highlights key things in your writing so you can quickly reference details in the world building you might have lost sight of. Very useful for building complex multi-generational feuds. Campfire Blaze also has dedicated tools for fleshing out locations, maps, cultures, species, magic systems, and more, so you can flesh out the whole story all in one place. Campfire Blaze also comes with 13 genre-based themes like fantasy, sci-fi, romance, and a custom theme creator, so you can pick the vibe and set the story's atmosphere. Campfire Blaze's free version is already feature-packed, but if you want more, you can build your own tool suite and only pay for the modules you need, which run as low as 50 cents each. You can also unlock everything for just a few dollars a month with a 30-day return policy if you change your mind. Check out the link in the description and make sure to use the promo code OSP21 for 20% off a lifetime purchase of Campfire Blaze.